this week's episode of Faster Masters Rowing Radio. Grab a seat at the table as Masters rowing coaches Marlene Royal and Rebecca Caro share their biggest secrets on how to unleash your hidden potential and plot a new course for real results on the water and off. Now, on to the show.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Faster Masters Rowing Radio. I'm Rebecca Caro, and today we're talking about 9 different ways to turn your boat around. Sounds easy, doesn't it? We all turn our boats. Yeah, it might have been a little wobbly and uncertain when we were first learning to row and scull. But why should this be something that's a worthwhile skill for Rebecca to pick as a podcast episode? Well, I want to start by asking you about what is your goal when turning the boat. Sounds a bit obvious, but actually there's a deeper issue here. Spatial awareness and safety are critical in rowing. Where you are on the water right now and where you want to get to and how you're going to get there. Now, it's an awareness that some of us have a slightly more heightened sense of than others. And that's probably because, like myself, I've been involved in a few clashes and collisions over the years, and they're not pleasant. Equally, I hate the sound of carbon fiber breaking. Have you ever heard it? It's kind of like fingernails going down a blackboard, and it's awful. So when you stop rowing with an intent to turn the boat stationary, so I'm not talking about steering here and changing direction while you're rowing continuously. I'm talking about stopping and turning. The first thing you need to think about is, where am I now and where do I want to be when I've completed the turn? Now, you may row on a river where there are rules of circulation. So you have to turn round and then be on the opposite side of the river in order to be in the correct place for your return journey. Or you might row on a lake where you can literally just turn on the spot and go right back the way you came, and there are no hazards to worry about. So that's what I mean when I talk about what is your goal when turning a boat. After you've stopped rowing, or preferably actually even before you stop rowing, you need to think about, where do I need to be at the end of this maneuver? And that will help you set yourself up for success in turning the boat. Let's focus a bit more about the different ways that you can turn a boat. So let's start with a really simple one. The first one is, are you going to turn the boat using half slide rowing? And the second one is full slide rowing. Or in fact, you can just sit stationary and row with just your arms. Most of us know that one way of turning the boat is to row normally on one oar, and then the people on the other side, or if you're a sculler with your other oar, you back water, backing down. Now, the turning moment of any rowing boat is a function of the length of the boat and the angle that you put the oar in the water. So if you want to turn the boat in a slightly more acute angle, if you go roll forwards to the catch and put your oar in the water, the angle that your oar will be much more close to being parallel with the side of the boat. So you get a much more acute angle. And you can then put the oar in the water and push the water sideways so that your bow turns around much more sharply. So 3 instant ways for you to think about turning the boat. Secondly, how are you going to take those strokes? You can turn the boat with simultaneous movements, so you can row on and back down at the same time. So both oars go in the water at the same time. One moves towards you, the other moves away from you, and you turn the boat. Then you take them out of the water at the finish and return to their respective catches and do the same again. Or you can do it alternating. So one stroke on one side, and then when you finish that, the other stroke on the other side. I will say that this tends to be the way that sweep crews turn. What's particularly useful if you do want to do the alternating form is to make sure that the other side is ready to start the stroke the minute the previous side has finished. And in sculling, that works quite nicely, because if you start at the finish and you're backing down with your left hand, you push that hand away, and at the same time, your right hand can follow the handle out to the catch, so that you're reached forward and you're ready to square and put the blade in at the catch with the other hand. Take the normal stroke with the other hand, and the hand that's been backing down follows the handle back and then is ready to back down, so that your handle movements, your hands are going out away from you and back towards you at the same time. And it means that you then have less weight from one stroke to the other. Particularly useful if you're rowing somewhere where there's a current and the stream can be pushing you when you're not putting force on the boat. Now, I'm going to tell you the other 5 ways of turning the boat after a quick announcement about our next upcoming webinar. It's called VIP Day. And I got this idea because I really want to encourage rowers to invest in themselves. What can you do for yourself, and what can we as Faster Masters Rowing give to you that really helps you advance your own rowing, your understanding of rowing, and takes your own skill set forwards? We really want you to come away at the end of this day feeling that you've been smothered with great ideas, things that are really actionable and have helped you understand better how the rowing stroke works. Our day is going to be presented by Troy Howell, who is someone well known to quite a few people. And I've got a little introduction for you here of what he's going to be talking about.
Okay, so my name is Troy Howell, and I will be the guest speaker for VIP Day on the 29th of February. And I just wanted to give you a very brief preview of the sorts of things that we will be talking about. This will sound like a digression, but it will swiftly come back to rowing and sculling, so follow along with me. The first rock concert I ever attended was the Kinks in Norman, Oklahoma in something like 1983 or 1984. And about halfway through their set, Ray Davies kept playing the opening chords of Lola, and then he would stop and approach the microphone and say, no, you're not ready for it yet, as a tease. And although he was building anticipation for their big hit, it got to the point where you could feel in the audience, and especially the way I felt was, just get on with it and play the song for Pete's sake. And it reminded me of when I was a novice learning to row in the 8, and our coaches would, they had us rowing by pairs and 4s and 6s for weeks on end. And every time that we would say, Coach, can we try all 8 today? The reply was always the same, which was like, you're not ready for it yet. And even then I wondered, well, okay, first, how ready do you have to be? And second, what's the worst that can happen? And I think that a lot of times, some of the things that we tell beginners sow doubt about being up to the task. And I don't know that that's the most productive teaching methodology. So we're going to talk about some of the things that we tell beginners and how those things may actually delay the learning process. So I hope you'll join us, and I think it'll be a good time.
So there you go. I'm very much looking forward to Troy being there with all of you. It's a great opportunity to come forward and understand why your coach said something that you then took to be a gospel truth. And then later on, you find out that perhaps they just said that in order to get you to learn the absolute basics. And now when you're getting more skilled, more advanced, you actually need to refine and improve your learning. And this covers a really large suite of skills and techniques in rowing and sculling. So the event is definitely suitable for anyone who has learned to row, anyone who considers themselves to be an intermediate rower, and anyone who isn't yet really skillful things like if you can row square blades at rate 30 for as long as I ask, if you can back down for 500 meters without batting an eyelid, this isn't probably the day for you unless you happen to be a coach and want to learn how to use this in your own coaching. But for all the rest of us, this is going to be the day that's really going to help you step up and understand contextually things that you used to just take at face value. And that's when the learning really begins to show through in your own sculling and rowing. Now, let's get back to different ways of turning the boat. A drag turn is what we call it when the boat moves in a very large arc around the arc of a circle rather than spinning on the spot. Spinning on the spot is kind of like, a London taxi cab, which is a very tight turning circle. A drag turn can be really useful because what you do is you have one side of the boat, put the oars in the water and check water, hold water, and the other side just rows. And you will make a nice circle and come to facing the opposite way. You can also do it in a shorter arc, and that can be achieved in a couple of different ways. One of them is to only have people in the stern of the boat holding water, checking water, so that they're actually the retarding force is much more accentuated toward the stern of the boat. And it's a little bit like that's the opposite of what I was talking about earlier, about getting your blade parallel with the side of the boat in order to make more of a sideways movement with the blade when you're trying to row on one side. You can obviously do that, as I said, in a wide arc or in a narrow arc. Now let's talk about different ways of doing the backing down and rowing on. You can just chop water. It was a phrase that I learned when I was in a big sweep program, where everyone sits stationary, legs straight, arms straight, bow side or stroke side. One side will have their oars facing the normal way. The others will turn their oars upside down so that the blade is upside down, ready to back on. And they just lift the hands up and down. And that tiny little difference in the curvature of the blade will very slowly start to move the boat so that it spins around. You can make the boat spin a little bit further, but instead of moving your hands up and down, you do tiny little strokes to either row on or back down, depending on which side you're on. But that chopping turn looks kind of cool. It can take quite a long time to execute. You have to be able to keep the boat balanced. Otherwise, you definitely don't look like you're enjoying the process. Another way of turning the boat, particularly longer boats, quicker, is just to use the end pairs. If you back down with the two people closest to the stern, so in an 8 it might be 8 and 6, or it might be 7 and 5, depending on which way you're turning, and then you use the opposite side of the boat in the bows, so either bow and 3 or 2 and 4, you then get a much greater turning moment around the middle of the boat, and the boat can also be held stable by the people who aren't rowing. So for beginners, this is actually quite a good way to turn a boat, because you're rowing on with the people who have the most leverage in the bow, and you're backing down with the people who have the most leverage in the stern. And that's quite a neat way of turning the boat efficiently and in a stable condition. You can also use the current to turn the boat. If you're on a river or tidal water, the current is moving in a particular direction, and depending on whether you're going with or against the current, you can start to turn the boat. And as you turn the bows into the current, if you start in the direction where you're rowing against the current and then you want to turn and return with the current, if you turn the bows towards the current so that it's in the stream, remember the edges of the river don't tend to have much flow. It's the middle usually where most of the water force and speed is. you can actually let the current turn a lot of the boat. Once you've started that turn, the current will then be up against the side of your boat and will start to push the bows round. And so you actually can get a much faster turn than you would if you were just turning on the spot. And of course, the opposite is true. If you're going with the stream and you want to turn against the current, getting your bows out of the current, the stern of the boat then gets pushed by the current and it helps turn the second half of the maneuver. Now, before we finish, I just want to talk about a couple of other little techniques that will help you with handling your blades and enabling the boat to turn in the smoothest possible way. The first thing I want to talk about is checking water, holding water, or holding it up. Now, the quickest way to stop a moving rowing boat is to feather your blade, put it on the surface of the water, and lift the handle up. This is how you do an emergency stop. It's how you teach beginners to do an emergency stop. By lifting the handle up, the spoon buries under the water and it very quickly acts as a really effective brake on the forward movement of the boat. As the boat slows, you can then gradually square the blade and it will, obviously, the surface area facing the direction of travel increases and it slows the boat further. You will probably have noticed that when you're told to hold it up or check water, a lot of people just try and square their blade. And depending on how fast the boat is moving, it's really hard to do. The handle rams into your chest and you find that the speed of the water basically pushes your spoon out of the water because you aren't strong enough to brake yourself against that forward force. And so the oar's trying to pop out of the water and you're trying to put it in the water and check it. And it's a really inefficient movement. If you want to check it or check it hard, as sometimes you get instructed to do it with feathered blades. And as the boat slows, then you can turn the blades square and come to a complete halt. So I offer you that as one bit of instruction. And the other is counter feathering. By that, I mean, here's my trusty oar illustrator. So normally your oar rests on the water flat with the curved side, the concave side upwards. Counter feathering is when you put the tip down on the water and the convex side is on the surface of the water. When you're backing down, particularly, there are two different schools of thought. Where I learned to row in the UK, generally speaking, people turn the oar so that it's upside down, and in a hatchet oar, the big bit, the deeper side of the oar is usually proud of the water's surface, and then they push backwards so that the curve of the spoon is pushing the water. And I admit there's some good logic to that, except when you consider the pitch of the oarlock and the cant of the head of the blade. Much of the blade is not under the water. Where I now live in New Zealand and Australia, they do it another way. They leave the oar the right way round, and what they do is put the oar in the water and then just push it backwards, even though the curved side of the blade, the wrong side of the curve, is pushing the water. Because more of the oar is under the water, it actually makes for quite a good movement. So I offer that to you as something to try. If you do choose to do that second method, one way of keeping your oar under control when you take it out of the water, so you push it away from you, is to then feather it the wrong way up and run that tip along the surface of the water as you're returning to the catch before you square and take another backing stroke. And it allows you to get a tiny little bit of stability on the surface while the other oar is doing its thing. And I definitely find that when I'm teaching beginners, they often have a less well-developed spatial awareness of what their hand is doing and what is happening as a consequence at the tip of the blade. And by getting the tip of the blade down on the water while they're doing something with the other hand, it gives them some certainty. And it also allows them to learn how to hold the boat level with just one hand, the side that isn't rowing to turn the boat, while the other hand does its little fun thing. Now, I've got a final bonus for you, which is for coxswains and coxed boats. I have a beef with so many coaches that they don't coach their coxswains. So this is a little special for you because I'm aware that I also fall into my own trap and fail to mention what coxswains should be doing. When you're turning a boat, coxswains, turn your rudder in the direction that you're turning. And the best way to get a good turn is to start the turn just as the crew is finishing rowing. Think back to the very, very beginning when I started saying, what is your goal when turning the boat? And I was talking about, do you want to turn on the spot? Do you want to turn and finish up on the opposite side of the river from where you started? So where is your destination at the end of the turn? And what I recommend coxswains do is you stop rowing, you easy, way enough, at high balance. So the oars are off the water and the boat is just running unchecked. And you start the turn on the rudder at that point. And then as the crew, you then say lower or drop or whatever. And as the crew lowers their blades onto the surface of the water, the side that is in the direction of the inside of the turn, you get them to hold water to check it. And you will find, particularly if they check it using the feathered blade method that I just described, that your boat has probably turned at least a third of the direction that you want before you even start telling the crew to turn the boat. So you can save an awful lot of time and distance. And you can also make it abundantly clear to other crews around you what your intent is. And this also works if you're in a coxless boat that has a steering mechanism. There's a rudder. You can do exactly the same thing. So easy at high balance, start the turn with the rudder. And then as the crew lowers the oars, check it on one side. And I always like to start with the backing movement first, because usually it's less powerful than rowing on. And particularly if you want to make a tight turn, it will then get the bows further moving in the direction that you want the turn to go through. So there you go. 9 different ways to turn your rowing boat. I hope that at least a couple of them are useful for you and that gives you something to try in the week coming. Till next time. Bye-bye.
You're part of the Rowing Chat Podcast Network. Please tell your rowing friends about the show. And if you've learned just one helpful thing from today's episode, please consider supporting the show for as little as $1 per month by visiting fastermastersrowing.com/podcast.